welcome to the Further Faster How To Hub. If you're watching this on the screen, you'll notice that Jason Perkins is here. And Jason, I've known you for quite a while now. You're not in the UK or Ireland, which is where our network is based. Tell us, just set us some context. Where are you right now? What time is it?
Well, Banksy, thanks for having me, mate. I'm super stoked to be here, and I'm based on the east coast of Australia in the city of Brisbane, home of the 2032 Olympic Games
Of
coming up.
course. Yeah.
We're so excited about that. Um, yeah, I'm on the east coast of Australia in the city of Brisbane, and I get to be a part of what's called the Irresistible Church Network in Australasia. So we do almost the exact same thing that you do there in the UK and Ireland, Duncan, but we just do it in Australia, New Zealand, and countries all throughout Asia. And so, yeah, super excited to be with you guys today. And I love hanging out with guys from the and leaders from the Further Faster Network. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, for those who are watching live, got to hang out with a bunch of leaders from the UK and Ireland over in Atlanta for a week. It was a lot of fun.
It was good. You know, somebody said to me last week while we were together in Atlanta, somebody said, what does Perko do then? So I said, oh, Perko does exactly the same job as I do. He just does it with a lot more sunshine. And I
Yeah,
think that kind of sums it up really, doesn't it?
that's
Um,
so true. So true.
so most of the how-to hubs, and if you haven't dived into one of our how-to hubs before, we called it the how-to hub because we want them to be incredibly practical little gems that will enable you to use it as a reference library and go back and think that, I can jot that down. I can put that into practice. It can fuel some conversation. This is a little bit different. This is, in a sense, if you want, you can put your pens and your notepads down, although I'm sure there are some bits that you're going to want to write down. But this is us talking from the heart. This is going to be raw. This is going to be real. In many ways, I wish it wasn't recorded because it's going to make Jason and potentially myself as well feel a little bit vulnerable. But what is leadership if it isn't vulnerable? Because we're talking about church hurt. How do we navigate it? How do we avoid it? And what do we do when it's part of our story? How do we overcome
Mm.
it? I don't think I've ever met a leader when you say to them, have you ever had some kind of church hurt? I don't think I've ever met a leader that said, oh, no. It's a breeze. It's easy. It's fine. It's
Mm.
just baffling to me. I don't know about you, Jason, how sometimes as believers, as Jesus followers, we're so quick to hurt each other. It seems crazy for me. Listen, what I'd love you to do, it would really help us and it help Jason in particular. What I'd love you to do if you're listening to this live, just in the chat, could you just engage the chat? I'd love you just to hit the chat button at the bottom. And I would love you to describe in just one word, okay? We don't need full sentences, we don't need paragraphs, just one word that would best describe how some kind of church hurt has impacted your life. Um, yeah, just in one word. For me, Jace, I was thinking about this. I can only get it down to two words. So it's lost confidence for me. So if you want to go two words, that's the max. I'll let you have that. But
Yeah.
it just, I can maybe talk a bit later about the kind of hurt I've gone through. But I can remember thinking I feel less confident about my ability to relate to other human beings. Feel less confident in my faith in Jesus. I feel much less confident in my ability to lead anything and my
Mm.
ability to stand in front of a group of people and talk. So certainly for me, a loss of confidence was a big part of church hurt for me. So if you're able to just in the chat jot down a few of those bits and pieces, that would be really really good. Disorientating, people have put down, Jason, deep wounds, let
Mm.
down, absolutely, frustrated, wounds, scarring. Yeah, there's a scarring, isn't it? That's so good. I love what Andy's put down. Disappointed. It is.
Mm.
There is a real sense of disappointment that you have to get to this stage, and it causes so much havoc. Yeah, yeah. So if Jason, if you would please keep jotting those down. That's really helpful. If you were to describe how church hurt has impacted your life, because let's be honest, I've seen you on stages in front of hundreds of people. Been in conversations with you. You're a really confident guy, and you're such a likable human being. It just seems amazing to me that you could ever be in a situation where you would experience some kind of pain because of what other Christians have done and said. But what word would you use to best describe the hurt that you've felt?
So Duncan, it's interesting. The word that comes to my mind is actually a word that I wasn't able to articulate until I ran into kind of my first church hurt experience. It wasn't a super painful one, but it was in my first leadership role at a local church. I was a lead pastor of a church in Colorado, actually. And because of some church hurt that I had been experiencing from some of the leadership in the church, I wound up in a counselor's office, and first time going to a counselor. And I remember the counselor, as I described, what had happened and what was going on in my life. And they asked me that quintessential classic counseling question. If you've ever been to a counselor, you've probably had this question before. The guy said to me, "So Jason, how did that make you feel?" And I said to the guy, "I feel like punching you in the face right now." That's how it made me feel, because I was so frustrated. But at the time, Duncan, I could probably only articulate maybe 3 or 4 feelings or emotions that I had. I could tell people I was good, I was frustrated, I was angry, and sad. That was probably the extent of my vocabulary when it came to how I was feeling about something. But the counselor that day actually handed me one of those feelings wheels, the emotions wheel. I don't know if you've ever come across that, Dunk, but I remember looking at the feelings wheel that day for the first time, and I said out loud, first time in my life, I said that I actually felt betrayed.
Wow.
It was the first time I'd ever said that I can remember that I was feeling betrayed. And that's exactly what church hurt has been for me over the last probably 10 or more years, has been oftentimes this feeling of betrayal. And it typically has come from people that I thought I really could trust and that had my back. Sometimes it was other leaders in the church. Maybe it was an elder or somebody on the board, or maybe even another staff member. But betrayal has been probably the word that I would say when it comes to church hurt that would really describe it the most.
That's great. I'm going to dig into your story of how you felt about that in a moment. Thanks for keep dropping it in the chat. I mean, it feels like it's a bit of a support group today, but people have put down like sad, disappointed. Somebody put down soul destroying. Wow. Yeah. Pete put down that it's lonely and isolating, and all of us can relate to that. That it's devastating. Friends become those that hurt. That's part of the difficulty, isn't it, as well? Jason, knowing I was going into this, somebody sent this to me about their story. I won't read you the whole thing. It was quite a long thing, but the first paragraph said this, and I just thought, wow, that sums it up. He said this, this is a church leader. "I've been strung along, overworked, taken advantage of. I've disclosed personal information in confidence and then had it shared broadly. I've had people sow seeds of doubt and mistrust in my marriage. I've been misled, backstabbed, and left to pick up the pieces. I've been devalued, ignored, and publicly made an example of. I've had friendships fall apart and been forced to watch people walk away. And that's just my church hurt." And he finishes by saying, "Like everyone else around me, I'm damaged goods."
Wow.
That's painful, isn't it? And as a leader, to feel like you're damaged goods because of the things that other Christians and other leaders have said and done is really hard. In the counseling world, they talk about the first steps to kind of overcoming anything is to acknowledge that it's happening.
Yeah.
It's to actually, like you said, with your feelings, Will, to say, this is who I am right now. So when did you first kind of step up and say, yeah, I'm going through, I can't push it under the carpet anymore? Tell us a bit of your story when it really started to surface for you and you had to acknowledge there was an issue.
Yeah, so for me, the first time that I remember a significant amount of church hurt, I'm sure there were more smaller occasions prior to that, but the first, what I would call wall that I hit, Duncan, was in leadership in the church in Colorado that I mentioned before. And this church had been kind of flatlining or maybe even a slight decline for a number of years. And a sad part of the story, Dunk, is that the guy that actually started the church, the founding pastor, was let go by the elder board because the church had started to, plateau and even decline a little bit in attendance and hadn't been growing in a couple of years. And so the elders were looking for someone that could come in and grow the church again. And because I had a bit of a history in growing ministries and even businesses in the past, I was the guy that they chose to come and lead the church again. And it was a couple of years in, Duncan, where we had experienced some significant growth. We had gone from one service to two services, and we were about to launch a third service as well. That one of the four elders actually left the church, but didn't, he was no longer on the elder board by this time, just because they had rolled off the way that our elders rolled on and off every few years. But I found out through one of our staff members, because he was a volunteer in that particular ministry area. And the staff member told me, "Oh, did you know that so-and-so and his family had decided to move on and find another church?" And I was like, I had no idea. So I finally reached out to him and had a coffee with him probably a month later or so. And over coffee, he was just sharing with me how, the church had grown so much so that he didn't really know that many people anymore. And he felt like it wasn't as a family like it used to be and all that kind of thing. And I was like, I remember sitting across the table from him, Duncan, thinking to myself, well, you're the one who brought me, you were one of the four that brought me into this church to help kind of get it growing again. And I remember walking away so confused, Duncan, and frustrated and betrayed, thinking, here's somebody that brought me to this place to do the work that I was being asked to do, but they weren't willing to go on the journey. They weren't willing to stick it out. Long story short, Duncan, we had a really good conversation, and eventually that family actually came back to our church probably about 9 months later, because their kids loved our kids ministry. Bottom line, the kids dragged their parents back to our church just because of the kids ministry, which is great. But I remember that wall, Duncan, for the first time, feeling like I'd been betrayed by somebody that I really trusted. One of the first people I trusted in that church to even move my family over there. And I remember when I was in the counselor's office, Duncan, naming what I felt was a really good first step to be able to begin working on what I needed to do to overcome that. If I wasn't able to name that I was feeling betrayed, I don't think I would have never been able to really work on specifically what I needed to work on and forgive the person and all the things that I needed to do in order to become healed from that situation again. So I agree that naming it, my wife is a counselor, Duncan, and she oftentimes says to people that when you can name it, then you can tame it. When you don't name it, then it can run wild and it can really mess with your emotions. But just the sheer practice of naming it means that you can begin to tame it. And that's been such a helpful tool to me over the years.
Yeah. Does it, again, I'm no counselor like I know Kristen is, but your wife, but once you go through the stage of acknowledging and naming the pain and the hurt and coming clean with it, I've heard in counseling circles before, I've heard people talk about moving from acknowledgement to adjustment, that you would, you've acknowledged that you're feeling this way, that this situation's happened. Did you then move to change things, to adjust, to lead differently, to be different from that point on?
Well, Dunk, I wish that I could say I learned my lesson right there in Colorado and it never happened to me again. But the truth is, I went on to pastor another church and had a very similar experience where some of the leadership that brought me into the church to begin with actually were the ones who eventually led to me no longer being at that church. They were the ones that I felt betrayed by again. And it wasn't until that second time, Duncan, I would say, which was a much bigger wall. The first church that I was in, I would say it was a wall that I hit. The second church really was a dark night of the soul. And the difference, I would say, is that it caused me not only to lose trust in maybe a particular person, but I began to really lose trust, Duncan, in the whole thing. I began to, struggle with my own trust in God, trusting in the church in general, not just a church, but in the institution of the church. It was such a painful experience that second time, that it really was a dark night of the soul for me, where I began to question so many things. And I remember it was a moment, Duncan, probably about, I would say, 3 months after this really painful experience, that I began to ask the question, what piece of the pie can I own in all of it?
Wow. I don't know. Am I still live here? We seem to have lost Jason. I don't. Are you still talking, Jason, or is that just me? Have I gone or have you gone? Can you still hear me in the chat?
Yeah, we can still hear you. I think Jason's internet has dropped.
Okay. Oh dear, that's a bit of a shame. Yeah,
Oh, he's
yeah.
back. I think Jason's back.
Back. Jason, we
Sorry,
lost you
Duncan.
for a little bit there. No, that's right. Can I just suggest, even though it's painful talking about this stuff, can you still pay your utility bill? It really, if you pay your electricity bill on time, they won't cut you off like this.
Well, it's because we're so far away from the internet in Australia that sometimes it's just the strength of the signal gets a little delayed. So no, I don't know where I was up to, Duncan, but I saw your frozen face. Yeah.
I'll tell you where you were up to, because this is really, really, really important. And I've had to do this myself, and I've had to talk to other people about doing it as well. You talked about asking yourself, which piece of the pie do I own? And that's where we lost you. And that was a game-changing thought for me. You're going through this pain. They're being horrible to me. They're saying nasty things to me. They're doing nasty things to me. They're betraying me, to use your word. And you put it all on them, and you forget to look in the mirror at yourself. So go on, talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, and it came, Duncan, from a conversation that I had again with somebody that was a counselor. And they told me that oftentimes, Jason, they said, people will finally go to counseling when they're so frustrated with the world around them. And then they realize, I can't change the world around me, but perhaps I can change something about myself.
Wow.
And they said that that's when a lot of times people will end up in a counselor's office, because they've tried so hard to change everyone else around them. They've tried so hard to change their circumstances or whatever it is. And they realize, oh, those things may never change, but the one thing that I can, have some control over, I have agency over, is myself. And so it was during that conversation, Duncan, that I began to really assess, what piece of the pie can I own? And to be fair, Duncan, I had so many people around me that would say to me when I asked the question, what can I own? They would say, Perko, I don't think you did anything wrong here. Like, these people clearly, betrayed you, and they built trust, and then they broke the trust. And even though I had that kind of group of people supporting me around me, I had to do the honest work of saying, yeah, but at the end of the day, is there anything that I could have done differently or that I would change? And so for me, Duncan, and I think this is true of many visionary leaders, I think the big challenge visionary leaders have oftentimes is unhealthy expectations.
Okay.
We hold some pretty high expectations as leaders, especially if you're a visionary leader. And the truth is, I was carrying some unhealthy expectations into that circumstance. So, for example, Duncan, if I go back to the Colorado example, I was expecting that everyone that was there at the beginning would stay with that church and stay with me like indefinitely. Yeah. Unless they were moving out of town for a job or something like that. I had this expectation that people would just love me. They would accept us as a family. My leadership would be great, and they would just stay in the church forever. Well, that's an unrealistic expectation, Duncan. Like, how many church leaders can say, I've got 100% record of keeping people in my church? I don't think there's any church leader that could be honest and say that. And so the reality was, I had an expectation that I was carrying, and the truth is it was an unhealthy expectation. And I think that's something as leaders, especially visionary leaders, we have to be honest with our expectations. Because Duncan, the old adage that every conflict is a gap between what you expected and what you experienced.
Yes.
And so if there's a gap between what I expected and what I experienced, we've heard the talks, Andy Stanley, who many of us really revere, he's got a great talk of what do you fill the gap with. But I would say before you even think about filling the gap, you should check your expectation to begin with, because perhaps you created the gap with an unhealthy expectation to begin with. And that's the story for me, well and truly.
That's so helpful. So that was your big takeaway. That was your big learning in terms of the piece of the pie, that you were setting unrealistic expectations of other people. What about expectations of yourself? Were you setting unhealthy or unrealistic expectations on yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, Duncan, I have this filter now that I use to help me identify whether an expectation is healthy or unhealthy. And as I worked through these four kind of filters, these four steps of a healthy expectation, the first thing I have to ask is, am I even aware of that I have the expectation to begin with? Yeah. Is it a conscious expectation? Many of the expectations, I would say, Duncan, that I carry, oftentimes they're completely unconscious. I'm not even aware of them. But in this particular case, Duncan, when we moved back to Australia, when I experienced that dark night of the soul and that really painful hurt from a church and betrayal, I was aware of expectations that I had. So that was a check. That's healthy. At least I was aware of it. One of the other filters is to ask the question, is the expectation spoken about or was it unspoken? And the truth is we had spoken about these expectations. So I was aware of it. It was spoken about. And then the last filter one of the other filters is, was it agreed upon?
Yeah.
And we had agreed upon these expectations. But the fourth, or the second one of the four that I skipped over, and I'm coming back to it last, is the question, was the expectation realistic?
That's good.
And here's how I would define realistic, Duncan. The best way to define it is this: does the person or do the people have a track record proving that they can fulfill this expectation?
Yeah.
So realistic, you might say, Duncan, oh, I think that was completely realistic, Jason, that these people should have been able to do that. But the truth is, the group of people, specifically this group of leaders, they had no track record of being able to do what we were setting out to do with this particular church. And so I had to be honest with myself, Duncan, and say, okay, I was aware of the expectation. We had spoken about it. We had even agreed upon it. But I was the fool. I was the foolish one as a leader to hold an expectation of a group of people that was completely unrealistic for them to accomplish because they had no history of doing this in the past.
Yeah. Guys, I think this is really important we hang on to this. This is a game changer for many of us, because the natural human condition is to point the finger at them and think it's nothing to do with us. And if you take nothing else away from this conversation we're having, maybe in the church hurt you're experiencing now, or the church hurt you're leading someone else through now, or the church hurt that you will experience around the corner because leaders continue to get hurt. I think it's before you go anywhere else, don't just have a pity party and wallow enjoy calling out other leaders. I think there's a part in which we need to look at ourselves and acknowledge ourselves, the part we have to play. Jace, one of the churches, I got let go from a church, and it was really painful. And a really, really good friend of mine, I mean, we'll come on to this later. I think for me, getting through some of the pain and hurt that I've experienced through church is having good people around me, mentors around me that stand with me. And I could talk until the cows come home about individual people who've done my soul good. But one of my good friends lent into me at the time when I was leaving this one church, and they said that very question: what's the piece of the pie that you need to own in this? Spend a month or so looking at it, figuring out what you think it is, and then talking to some other leaders in the church situation that you know and say, does this describe me? And churches outside the situation as well. And I thought, one of the things that I tend to do is, as a leader, is I can over advocate for things. So if I can't get you to follow my way, Jace, I'll over advocate. I'll say, no, come on, you got to do it. Come on, we got to do it. Trust me, it's going to be fine. Come on, dive in. And I can almost wear people out with trying to pummel them into doing what I want them to do. And I thought, is that me? I don't know. So I asked a few other people around inside the church and outside the church. Every single one of them said, yeah, that's you. That's you, Banksy. You over advocate all the time for this kind of stuff. And so I learned that about myself. And I can remember starting my next job, my next role. And I was in a meeting with some people on the team. And I'd suggested a way forward through a problem, or suggested a new program, or whatever it might be. And two or three on the team pushed back on it. And I could feel myself starting to over advocate. I could feel myself starting to go, no, come on, let's get on to this. Trust me, it's going to be great, isn't it? And I pulled back from it. And it was because it's like most of those things are unimportant. And I pulled back for it and understood that maybe I was wrong and they were right. And I took the learning from my last place into this place, and the relationships were better because there was a piece of pie I was the one causing some of the problems there. So I think it's a great. I'm so glad we started here. It's so important that we look at ourselves. Can I ask you another question, Jace? Talking about friends and mentors and that, in the heart of the pain, how did you get through what happened to you in Colorado and what happened to you in Australia? What were the kind of practical things that you did that enabled you? Because you said it was like the dark night of the soul. You said you were ready to throw the towel in for ministry, what got you through it?
Yeah, I would say community, Duncan, is absolutely critical. I had a really supportive community around me of both family, friends, and then some really qualified mentors. So you, Duncan, you've actually got Lance Witt with you this week, I think, in the UK and Ireland. And Lance has been a great friend, a mentor to me, journeyed through some things when I was at the church in Colorado. When I came back to Australia and was at a church here, Lance was a great friend and mentor. And I would say, Duncan, even when you're not in tough times of leadership, having a group of people around you that can mentor you and can speak life into you and ask you the tough questions, I think that's absolutely critical. In fact, I still today meet with probably a half a dozen different mentors every month. And I know that sounds maybe a little extravagant, over the top. Some of those people are just friends who have become mentors. Some of them are people that actually I pay them to coach me in leadership. But I think it's really important to have some people around you that can ask the hard questions and can coach you through, even when things are going well. So that when you do fall on tougher times, which are inevitably you're going to have them. It's part of the human experience that we go through pain and suffering. But they'll be there and they'll know your story already. They'll already know your context, and they'll be able to speak truth into your life during those seasons that are really tough.
Let me push you on that, because you were quite courageous in that. So you didn't know Lance Witt. You knew of him because he was worked with Rick Warren at Saddleback. So he was a high profile leader. You knew him, you knew of him, but you didn't know him. But you reached out to him. You took the courage to say, I need to find someone who I can sit with and talk. And again, I say that because I want to push us to think bigger, to ask somebody else, to send an email, to get on the phone, because sometimes, again, we'll sit on our own and we'll try and process this on our own, and we'll just end up getting more and more bitter and more hurt. I applaud you for that. You took the courage to say, I'm going to try and reach out to someone I respect who doesn't know me, I don't know them, and see if we can form something. And I can remember you talking to me in the past about, you sometimes wondered whether you would actually get through what you had gotten through if it wasn't for people like Lance in your life.
Yeah. I reached out, Duncan, to a couple of friends that I really respected in ministry and asked them, hey, if you could recommend somebody. I kind of explained what was going on. If you could recommend somebody to me, who would you recommend? And two of them both recommended Lance. And so I reached out to Lance, and we started with a coaching relationship. It was a paid coaching relationship in the beginning. And the truth is, Duncan, I didn't have the finances to cover it. Our church, we hadn't budgeted for that particular line item. But I remember actually speaking to a friend of mine in the church, who was a former elder in the church. So he really understood kind of the makeup of the church and what I was going through. And he and his wife, Clay and Krista Enoch, they actually covered the cost
Wow.
for my first 12 months working with Lance. And
Wow.
I'm so grateful. Like I tell people all the time, I've told them several times, if it wasn't for their investment, I'm not sure I'd still be doing what I'm doing today.
Yeah.
And so I'm so grateful. But I do think, Duncan, it takes, maybe I was in such a painful position. I was so desperate, but it did take a lot of vulnerability and courage just to say, hey, I need help. It was partly my wife really encouraging me. She said, Jason, I think you need some help. I don't think you can just keep doing it the way you're doing it. And I'm so grateful for the encouragement that was given to me.
Do you find with church hurt that I certainly my experience is I don't mind someone not liking my style, not
Yeah.
liking my preaching, thinking my leadership is a bit not the kind of leadership they enjoy. That's fair. It's when it gets personal, that's when it starts to hurt. I don't get hurt when someone says, you're too enthusiastic when you preach, or you don't preach the Bible enough, or whatever. That's fine. I can cope with that. But when it gets personal, I honestly, but I mean, I've got to be careful not to get too emotional. But I can remember one of the churches I was involved in when I was a much younger leader. The pain of me and my wife Debbie, we lost our first baby. Debbie was pregnant up to 6 months, and we lost the baby. And I can remember, Debbie nearly lost her life. Something had gone wrong, and I was in the emergency room with her, and the doctor pulled me one side, took me into this little room, and he said, "Mr. Banks, you've definitely lost your daughter, and there's a likelihood you're going to lose your wife as well." And I can remember going home that evening thinking, I'm just going to be on my own. I've got no child, no wife, no. It was just frightening. And, God was kind enough to spare Debbie, but it was a painful time. And somebody at the church who was in leadership said to me, I honestly believe Debbie's got the spirit of death on her womb because of your bad, leadership, or bad, you not being the kind of person you should be. And I had to cope with that. And I decided not to tell Debbie that until a long time afterwards. And then the following day, one of the elders of the church took me to one side and sat me down and said the most bizarre thing. They said, Duncan, I get taken to this secret place in God that not everybody gets taken to. I've been there 2 or 3 times. I'm fortunate enough that God would take me to this secret place. And I'm thinking, what? And he said, the last time I was there, God told me that you are not a Jesus follower. The Spirit of Jesus does not live inside of you, and you are going to a lost eternity unless you repent. And it's like, what? I hadn't stolen any money or, run off with someone else's wife, or they just didn't like the style of my leadership. And so they were trying to find ways to hurt me so I would walk away. And it was just the most toxic thing. So I guess the question off the back of that, and it was personal. That was what made it so difficult. It was so personal. The question off the back of that I'd love you to kind of speak into is, it seems to me that church hurt is mainly driven through poor or toxic leadership.
Yeah.
You've experienced church hurt in a relatively minor way, and a way that led you to the dark night of the soul. And it was both times it was driven by poor leadership or toxic leadership. How do you spot poor toxic leaders? I wish someone had warned me off of going to this place that I went to that caused me so much hurt when I was a younger leader. I didn't spot it. How do you spot leaders that are toxic, leaders that are poor? And then how do you deal with it when you come face to face with them?
It's a great question, Duncan. Um, I think I'd love to answer the question, and I'd also love to. Ricky Rue has popped something in the chat that I think is really important for us to identify. Because you've kind of touched on this already, Duncan. The truth is, the church cannot hurt you. There's no way for the church to hurt you. And I remember my wife, Kristen, and we stopped saying, fill in the blank church hurt us, or fill in the blank, organization has hurt us. These organizations and churches don't actually have the ability to hurt you. They're not a person. It's an organization. It's an institution. And so we had to stop saying fill in the blank church or fill in the blank organization has done this to us. And we had to be honest and say, no, it was actually a specific person. And oftentimes it's a small group, maybe even just an individual that has done the hurt or has offended us or what have you. So I think that's a really good point that Ricky's making. And I think it's one that we've got to just clarify, that we're not hurt by a church or an organization, but it's leaders within that church or organization oftentimes. And so, Duncan, I think to answer your question about toxic leadership, unfortunately, Duncan, I don't have like a silver bullet for you, because the truth is oftentimes the reason these leaders are toxic is because they have an ability to mask their unhealthy leadership. And so things will oftentimes in the beginning look very good. In fact, from the outside, you may say things like, man, this is going to be the best opportunity I've ever had. It seems like things here are so healthy. And so I think if I was going to point out one thing, Duncan, it would be, if it seems too good to be true, then perhaps that's a bit of a flag for you. Because we're all broken, including us, Duncan. I've had to, and I'll share a little bit more detail about this in a moment, but I've had to go back to both churches both churches that I have led. I've had to go back to people within those churches and apologize for even some of my poor leadership. And so I think we're just broken people. And so if you come across a leader or an organization or a church that it just seems too good to be true, that would be a bit of a yellow or a red flag to me as a leader. And I would ask and explore the questions around, hey, where has there been some disruption or some unhealthiness in the leadership of this church? And if they're not able to articulate like, hey, we've had some problems along the way, then that would be a red flag for me, Duncan, because I think honest, healthy leadership is going to be able to talk about the things where they've not done it well in the past.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Looking back on when I was a younger leader, I wish someone had told me that, because on the outside, this job I went to looked fantastic. I kept moving goalposts and asking for more things, and they kept accommodating me. They were desperate for me to come. And it just seemed, the big church seemed too good to be true. And I can remember the first week I was there, the lead pastor saw me in a coffee shop in town. And he came to me the following day in the office. It was my day off, and I was in the coffee shop in town drinking coffee. The following day, he called me into his office and he said, Duncan, just a word to the wise. When it's your day off, don't go into town and drink coffee. We don't want people thinking you're not working. So if you want to have a cup of coffee, go drive 50 miles away and go to another town and drink coffee there. And right from early on, I thought, oh, it's not quite as, because I thought that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
In fact, that's dangerous. I would be quite happy to say it's my day off. I'd like people to see that I take a Sabbath and a rest bite, because that's important as part of discipleship. So right, a week in, I began to think, oh, this is, and it turned into being incredibly toxic by the end of it all. But at the time, it was right early on. It wasn't all that it cracked up to be. So I wish someone had said to me, if it looks too good to be true, don't do it. Dive into what you were going to tell us. You were going to tell us a little bit about what happened.
Yeah, well, you were saying, Duncan, that you were asking the question, how do you deal with toxic leadership?
Yeah.
And I think, the first thing that I've had to learn is that most often my hurt, especially when it comes to ministry and my church experiences, oftentimes is because I had my identity tied so closely to what I was doing or
Oh
who
man,
I was as a leader.
so good.
Um, and so when I was being attacked or I felt like I was being attacked, it was not just an attack on me or my leadership or my style or whatever. It was actually, it felt like a full on, onslaught on me as a person. So oftentimes, Duncan, you've had this, I'm sure, as everybody. I can't imagine there's a single leader on this webinar that hasn't had somebody attack their communication style or their preaching. That seems to be one that gets attacked often because we're quite vulnerable. We get up in front of a group of people every weekend and we share our lives, we share our stories, we share our hearts, and we share something that's incredibly vulnerable, what it looks like to have a faith in God, a God that you can't see, and our relationship with that God. And so we are vulnerable and we get up in front of people. But then when people start attacking our communication or our preaching style, if your preaching is tied to your identity, then it's going to feel like they are attacking you. And the truth is, Duncan, my identity has been so wrapped up in my work, in my role, in my leadership for so long that it was very hard for me to untangle that mess. But it was probably the most important work that I could possibly do as a church leader, was to detangle my identity from my ministry and my work and my leadership. That's probably the most important work I could do as a leader in a local church, was to get my identity separated from what I do and have it completely rooted in my identity in Christ.
Yeah.
And Duncan, you know this, you know that it's a struggle for me still today. I wrestle with it every day, so much so that I have a bit of a routine or a rhythm or a practice of going over my beloved charter every single day, just to remind myself, maybe even more than once a day, remind myself of who I am as my beloved, as the beloved child of God, full stop. Not because I'm preaching, not because I'm leading a church or a network of churches, but because I'm just a beloved child of God. And so, how do you deal with toxic leadership, Duncan? I think it starts with you. I don't think you're going to be able to change somebody else. God's got to do the work in their life. And I think we can trust the Holy Spirit to do that. But I think it's got to start with getting your identity rooted in your belovedness in Christ and not in what you do. That would be my first suggestion.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so important. For me, one of the things that's helped me in the past when I've come across toxic leadership, and I've got a question into this as well for you, is somebody said to me, you need to set boundaries. Did you ever read, was it Henry Cloud wrote that book,
Yeah,
Boundaries?
boundaries.
One of
Yeah.
the most helpful books I've ever read. Henry Cloud being a Jesus follower and a world-renowned psychologist as well. So he comes from both stables, which was so good. And he talked about the power of setting boundaries, um, that you don't have to lose relationship with people, but you need to say, hey, I still want to have a relationship with you, but because of what's happened, we need to put boundaries around this kind of relationship. So we will only meet at these times. We will only meet in these places. One of the boundaries I set in one of the toxic relationships that I found myself in as a younger leader with a toxic leader who was causing so much pain for me is I said, yes, I will meet with you, but I will only meet with you if somebody else can be in the room. Somebody,
Yeah.
you give me a name and I'll give you a name and we'll see if we can find some person that we both trust, but then we will meet, but as long as you're sat in the room with me. So I think you're right. Sorting out your identity in God, and separating that from your assignment from God
Mm.
is a really important start point. But I think the second thing to do is to make sure you set boundaries. And then I guess the third thing is what we talked about earlier, is find mentors, find someone who can walk with you. Because somebody put it in the chat earlier on, when you're going through the pain of people hurting you, you can feel so lonely,
Yeah.
especially as a leader, because it's really hard as a leader in church to make friends with people in church.
Mm.
There's always feels like there's an agenda, so you never feel quite close. So to find those, I mean, we often talk about it in your network and our networks. The power of the network is the network, and
Yeah.
it's that sense of care that we can. And I've seen it happen in our network. I've seen other leaders pick up the phone to other leaders in the network and say, hey, I'm struggling with this. Can we have a conversation?
Yeah.
And it's a really, really helpful thing.
I would go on, Duncan, I would go on to say in the context of community, I think it was Lance Witt actually that encouraged me, and maybe some others as well, to have some community around me that didn't know me as Jason the pastor. They just knew me as Jason. You know how much I love to play pickleball, Duncan. They just knew me as Perko, the guy that loves to play pickleball. They had no idea what I did for a living. They had no idea about the context of my, my pain and my work or whatever. But they just enjoyed me as a friend that played pickleball with them.
Yeah.
And I think that's important as well, to have that community around you that they're not connected to you because of your identity of what you do, but just because you're another human being. I know, Duncan, you've got people at the gym that you're connected with, and they're not connected to you because of what you do, but just you're the gym guy that they love to work out with. So I think that's another piece of community that many times those of us in church leadership, we fail to really go after, because we've got so much community built into our work that oftentimes it can suffocate other parts of community that need to be a part of a healthy life.
Yeah. Brilliant. I've just had I've got a question I want to ask you. I just had a flashback moment. I won't say who it was because people on this call might know who it was. But I was speaking at a conference, Spring Harvest. It's a big European, I think it's the biggest Christian conference in Europe. It was anyway back in the day. Don't know if it still is. And I was speaking at that event, and I was sitting with a leader who I revered, author of lots of books, mainstay speaker, real hero of mine. And I hesitate to say this, but he said it was so helpful because he said, I told him the story, and he said, I'm going to pray for you, and then I'm going to tell you one thing. So I put my head down, and it was for me, it was so helpful. He just said, Jesus, I'm so pissed off about what's happened to Duncan. And it was, for me, just in that moment, he reflected that sense of hurt and frustration and passion. It wasn't a nasty swear word. It was a pretty mild swear word, but to actually do it in a prayer. And I hugged him afterwards because I thought, you understand, you get it, But then the piece of advice he gave me afterwards, he stood up from his chair, began to walk away. And he said, in fact, he did, because he stood up from his chair, he walked away and he came back and he said, oh, by the way, he said, don't waste the crisis. And then just walked away again.
Wow.
Again, I mean, this was 20 years ago and it's still ringing in my mind, that don't waste the crisis, and I ruminated on that beforehand. So I'm just wondering how, from those painful experiences that you've had in churches in Australia and overseas as well, how have you turned what seems to be quite a negative thing that you could have walked away from into a positive?
Yeah.
Have you not wasted your crisis?
Yeah. So Duncan, this last experience that we've described, the dark night of the soul that I had when I came back to Australia and was working at this church, and things ended really painfully. It really catapulted me on this journey of tending to the garden of my inner life of soul care. Up until that point, Duncan, I would say that most of my life and leadership was primarily focused on how do I harvest the forest of my external life. I was thinking about it actually, Duncan. We were just away at a conference together, and I was thinking about, I used to, when I would pick all of my breakouts or my workshops at a conference, I would select them based upon all of the things in my external life that I was trying to overcome. So if we needed more money, I would go to the fundraising workshop. Or if I was having trouble with my staff and there was conflict, I would go to the workshop on how to build a really healthy staff culture. And the list goes on. But rarely would I pick the workshop that talked about the formation of a pastor's inner life. Like, first of all, I didn't even know if there was those workshops. I certainly hadn't selected them. But not wasting a crisis, Duncan, really has been the catapult or the catalyst for me to pay attention to my inner world more than I'm working on my outer world. Paying attention to the garden of my inner life more than just trying to harvest the forest of my external life. And it was a turning point moment for me, Duncan, a few years ago now when this happened. And I still believe that God is using it today to shape who I am on the inside, who I'm becoming, the person that I'm becoming. I think he's far more interested in who I'm becoming and who he wants me to become more than what he wants me to get done. I mean, when you think about it, we serve a God that spoke the world into existence. If he wants to accomplish something, he doesn't need our help to do it. I think he loves to invite us to do the work with him simply because he wants us to be with him, not because he needs us to get something done, but he loves to do the work together. And so that's how I would say I've not wasted the crisis, Duncan. I've used it and continue to use this crisis to keep me focused on who does God want me to become, not just what he wants me to get done.
Yeah. If the crisis pushes you back into the arms of Jesus and your relationship with him, then it's not been wasted.
Yeah.
I often I think we talked about it last week when we were in Atlanta, that there's a picture in the Bible that I always it's kind of burnt on my mind. I can't remember where it is. It's in the Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. It's somewhere where it talks about Jesus's favorite disciple John. It talks about him leaning back into the arms of Jesus. And you remember, around the meal table, they would recline rather than sit up straight on chairs like we do today. And you can just imagine, it was just, I think John leaned back into the arms of Jesus or onto the breast of Jesus kind of thing. And I just pictured myself of what it must have been like for John and I'm getting emotional talking about it, but just leaning back and feeling Jesus's arms over your shoulders and holding you. And wow, if the crisis pushes you back into the arms of Jesus, if the pain that you're experiencing pushes you back into the arms of Jesus, then it hasn't been wasted. Listen, we've got maybe 10 minutes or so left. I have one question, but if anybody else has a question for Jason or for me, but a question or a comment that you want to make about what you've heard that might help other people, I want to just flip the script a bit, Jason. And this might be a difficult one to answer. But I worry in conversations like this, because I ask myself the question, am I that leader? Am I a toxic leader? Am I causing hurt, church hurt to someone else who's in my team or in my church? Or how do you spot, what are the telltale signs? How can you look in on yourself and figure out whether you are in danger of being the kind of person that's bringing hurt to other people? And it could be inadvertently by your action. Or it could be obvious. What kind of things would you suggest we could do just to make sure we're not the kind of people, because we've been hurt so badly by these toxic. I don't want to be that kind of leader. I don't want to drift in my frail dotage into being that kind of leader that causes that kind of pain.
Well, Duncan, I alluded to this a little bit earlier that I had to go back and apologize to some people in churches that I've led in the past. And one of the reasons I did that was I actually reached out to somebody that had worked for me in the past, someone that Duncan, Celeste. Yeah. And I asked Celeste the very question you're talking about. And she had experienced some church hurt under my leadership. The drivenness that I had, the lack of just awareness of my own emotional health had really kind of leaked out onto her. And so I had to ask her forgiveness. I had to then go back to a few other people on the team that I had been leading and ask their forgiveness as well. And I think, Duncan, the way in which you can identify, am I that kind of leader that is hurting other people, is to be brave enough to ask the people that you're leading, what's it like to be on the other side of me? Our good friend Jeff Henderson coined that phrase or that question. I think it's a brilliant question. What's it like to be on the other side of me? And being brave enough to ask that question, I think, is going to be incredibly helpful. I remember coming back one time from a conference, Duncan, and asking a team of people that I led, hey, what do you worry about, or what are you fearful about the most when I come back from a conference like I just went to? And all of them, without even hesitating, they didn't even have to talk to each other. They all immediately said, "Oh, Jason, we can tell you immediately. We are worried that you're going to come back with a book full of ideas of things that we should have been doing a year ago."
Yeah.
And so very quickly, Duncan, it dawned on me, oh, I am a driven leader that creates unrealistic expectations, false deadlines, false timelines for things that just aren't realistic. And so I think, Duncan, if you're willing to be brave enough to ask those questions, it's going to take some courage to ask a team of people or people that you've worked with in the past, hey, was there any times when I was leading you that you were hurt by me? What was it like to be on the other side of me? All those kinds of questions, I think, is going to reveal to you maybe not easy things, but will reveal to you some really healthy things that you can then make adjustments in your leadership.
Wow. So if you're listening to this live or you're listening to this as a recording on YouTube, this is the final piece. This is the takeaway. This is the moment that's going to stick in your mind if you've made it to the end. And it's that question. It's having the courage to say to the people around you, what's it like on the other side of me? Just be aware that when you ask that question, I've asked it in multiple times. Sometimes you ask it and people quite quickly say, hey, I'm glad you asked, because right now I'm really frustrated by this, that, and the other. And that's revealing in itself. But most of the time, whenever I've asked that before, people say, thanks, that's a great question. Would it be okay if I went away and thought about that? And to be honest, when people say that and nothing comes front brain straight away, then you feel like you're on the right track. But when they come back, they've thought about it for a bit and they've dug a little bit deeper, and they can quite honestly say, sometimes in meetings you do this, or sometimes when you're preaching you say this, and that's a bit frustrating. And so yeah, it's a great question to ask, and I think it's a great place to stop, Jace.
Yeah, Dunk, Chris, just so you know, Chris Simpkins has just dropped a question in the chat that I think is a really powerful question. He's given some context, but the question ultimately is, how do I protect my kids from hating the church that Jesus created to be his vehicle of hope and love into the world because of some awful things that people have said or done to me?
Chris, that's a great question.
It's a great question. And Chris, I have 3 now adult children who have gone through both of these significant church hurts with me, especially the last of the 2. And I was quite open and raw and vulnerable with them about what was done and what was said and so on. But it really was, Chris, when my wife and I didn't connect the hurt to the church, but we were really clear that this was not XYZ church that hurt us as a family. This was a specific leader or a specific person that said these things. And when we could separate those 2 things, I think that was kind of the clarity that our kids needed to be able to still love the local church, but just be aware of the fact that, like us, there are broken people in the local church that can cause pain and hurt. And it's inevitable that you may experience that, but it's not the church that's actually hurting you. It's individuals within the church. That was really helpful. And then the second thing, Chris, just to kind of highlight, and I don't mean to just throw this away, this is so important. My wife, Kristen, and I, we prayed regularly that God would allow their hearts to be soft, and that they wouldn't become hardened towards the local church. And I believe it's only the grace of God that all 3 of our adult children, and 2 of them are married with spouses, that they're still involved in local churches today, in their own local churches, not with Kristen and I. And I think it's only by his grace that's their story.
Yeah, great question and a really, really helpful answer. Really appreciate that. Fabulous. Listen, these how-to hubs, I get so many comments from people saying how helpful it is. Not just that lead pastors can come and listen, but they can bring their teams to it as well. We do a lot in your network in Australia and Australasia, and for us in Ireland and the UK, we do a lot to help lead pastors. And sometimes it's easy for our teams and others, key leaders and volunteers in our churches to miss out. So these how-to hubs have been great because lead pastors are bringing their staff teams to them and giving the link to their elders and saying, you need to listen to this as well. I'm excited about what's coming up next. Jason, have you heard of a guy called Gavin Adams before?
I have heard of Gavin Adams. He's a fantastic leader, an incredible communicator, Duncan, in a wide range of areas. Like, he's great with sermon series planning, but he's also great with fundraising. And before you go on, Duncan, I want to give a shout out to Ricky Rue from the network there in the UK, who was actually on our webinar with the Australasian crew at 2:00 in the morning recently, Duncan. So just a word to everyone listening, feel free to join us down under for any of our webinars. If you're a night owl, you might enjoy it at 2:00 in the morning.
Can I suggest as well, even if you don't want to do what Ricky did and get up at 2:00 in the morning, if you register, Jason will send you recording straight afterwards. So I registered for the same one as Ricky did, but I'm not as spiritual as Ricky, and I didn't get up early. So I'm looking forward to hearing that back. But yeah, we've got Gavin with us next month in June. You'll get all the information about it. But
what's the topic, Duncan?
Well, what's the topic? If you're a church leader, it's perfect because he's talking about preaching, communication, just how we can get better at communicating, whether you're communicating in kidmin or with students, or you're a Sunday preacher, just how you can shape up the way you communicate for a new generation. So I'm really looking forward to that, because Gavin is one of the best communicators I've come across.
He's terrific.
He grew a church from very tiny to very big that became a campus of North Point. And now he helps churches all over the world do the same thing. So we're really lucky to have Gavin with us. So that's early June next year.
Then Duncan, you've got some live events happening this week as well with Lance. Is that right?
Yeah. If you're anywhere near Chorley, which is up near kind of Bolton way, on Tuesday next week, or if you're anywhere near Milton Keynes, shooting distance of Milton Keynes, Venture Church in Milton Keynes, on Wednesday this week, Lance is doing an all-day workshop from, I think it's like 9:30 to 3. And it's around some of the stuff we talked about today. He's going to talk about how you can be a healthy leader and have a high impact. You know, sometimes you read a lot of books on healthy leadership, and they're great. They're really important. But you read them and you think, hang on a minute, I've got goals to achieve. I've got a team to lead. I need to chase the mountain, you know. So Lance is brilliant in talking about how you can still stay healthy and still reach your goals all at the same time. Yeah. So you know Lance well, as you said, and so we're really looking forward to that. So Tuesday, Wednesday next week, if you're within shooting distance, we'll even feed you for free. We'd love to see workshops. Go to our website and register there. There's about 50 in each venue, so we're looking forward to that.
That'll be great. So mate, good, Dunk. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure, and miss you, mate. And we'll. Hey, how about coming to the UK next year? We get you live and in person.
Let's do it. May next year, 2027. Let's just make it happen.
Definitely. We'll figure that one out between now and then. We'd love that. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Dunk. See ya.
See ya. Bye.